To solve this linear equation, first I need to distribute that and this negative sign. So negative 6x minus negative 6 times negative 2 will be plus 12 plus 3 equals 9 minus x minus 4. And so I'll just collect all the x's on one side and all the things that don't have x's on the other side. And so if I add this x over, that'll give me negative 5x here. And I have the 9 minus 4, that's 5, and then I want to subtract 3, that's 2, and then I want to subtract 12, it's going to be negative 10. And then I can divide by that negative 5, make it x equals 2. For this one, I notice that I have these rational functions. So the first thing I want to do is multiply through by something that will clear out all the fractions. So I'm going to rewrite that function over here, x over okay, so I'm going to multiply both sides by x plus 5. And I'll also multiply both sides by 4 to get rid of that other denominator too. And so what do I get? On the right-hand side, I can see that I have x plus 5 over x plus 5. That divides to make 1, and I'm left with is 4x. On the right-hand side, this x plus 5 and this 4 are going to distribute to both things. And so what will I have? So when I multiply that negative 5 over x plus 5 times x plus 5, that gets rid of that denominator. And then negative 5 times 4 is negative 20. And then when I multiply this 5/4 by 4, that gets rid of the denominator. And then I'll have 5 times x plus 5. Okay. And then I can distribute that 5 here and here. And then I get 4x equals negative 20 plus 5x plus 25. Okay, and then if I want to move all the x's onto one side, I can subtract 5x from both sides, and I get negative x is equal to 5. So x is equal to negative 5 is my solution. The next one says Dexter's truck gets 32 miles per gallon on the highway and 24 miles per gallon in the city. The amount of gas he uses is given by that, where C is the number of city miles and H is the number of highway miles driven. If Dexter drove 60 miles in the city and used 9 gallons of gas, how many highway miles did he drive? And so I noticed that this 60 is a value of which variable? Well, C stands for the number of city miles, so this is telling me that C is equal to 60. And I also know that the amount of gas he used, A, is the amount of gas he uses. So if he used 9 gallons of gas, that means A equals 9. And then the thing I want to solve for is I want to figure out what is H. Okay, so let's plug in 60 for C and 9 for A and solve for H. So 9 is equal to 1/24 times 60 plus 1 over 32H. So I notice that 60 over 24 simplifies to 5/2. And then I can subtract 5/2 from both sides. So how many halves is 9? 9 is 18 halves minus 5/2 is equal to 1 over 32H. So that gives me 13 halves. It's equal to 1 over 32H. And I can multiply both sides by 32. And that gives me 32 over 2 is 16 times 13 is 208. So that's the number of highway miles that he drove. So 208 highway miles. Max and Molly plan to put down all weather carpeting on their porch. The length of the porch is 2 feet longer than twice the width, and the perimeter is 64 feet. First, I want to find the dimensions of the porch. So, I think we're assuming that the porch is a rectangle. So it'll have some length and some width. And so the first thing, I want to use this equation here. Okay, and that will tell me that the length is 2 feet longer than twice the width. So L is going to be 2W, that's twice the width, plus 2 more. And then I also know that the perimeter is 6 feet, 64 feet. And so what's the perimeter? The perimeter would be length plus width plus length plus width. So 2L plus 2W is equal to 64. Okay. And so what I can do first is I can substitute that in for L. So I have 2 times 2W plus 2 is plus 2W, excuse me. Equals 64. So how many W's is that? I have 4W plus 4 plus 2W equals 64. So that gives me 6W equals 60, W equals 10, which means that the length is equal to 2 times 10 plus 2, which is 22. So, so that would be 10. So the length is 22, and the width is 10, and the units of that are feet. And how many square feet of carpeting should they buy if they add an additional 10% for waste? Okay, so let's see how many square feet are they buying now. So 10 times 22 is 220. And then we want to multiply that by 1.10 because they're going to buy 220 plus 10% of 220. And so I get 242. Another way to think of that is that if their porch is 220 square feet, and if I did 10% of that, 0.10 times 220, that gives me 22 feet squared. And that's the amount extra. And so they need to add that to the 220. 220 plus 22. So that gives me 242. So that's the same thing that I got by multiplying by 1.10. So whichever way you want to think about it is fine. Then Fenton invested money in a 3-year CD that returned the equivalent of 4.4% simple interest. He invested $2,000 less in an 18-month CD that had a 3% return. Okay, so we've got 2 different investments. So let's write down what we're doing here. So I have 2 different investments, and they are for different amounts. So let's make some variable names. So let's let X be the amount invested in the 3-year CD, and let's let Y be the amount invested in the 18-month CD. And then I know that he invested less than the 18-month CD, so that tells me that X is going to be the amount he invested in the 18-month CD plus 2,000 more. So that is one equation that relates X and Y. The other equation that relates X and Y is going to have to do with the amount of interest. Okay, and so I know that, let's see. So I know that for my amount invested in my 3-year CD, the interest on the 3-year CD is going to be given by the amount invested times the rate, which is 0.044, times the amount of time. It's a 3-year CD, so the time is 3. And the interest on that 18-month CD is going to be y times the interest, or the rate, which is 3%, 0.03, times the amount of time. So 18 months is 1.5 years. And so if I add those two together, I should get my total amount of interest was 706.50. So let's add that up. So 3 times 0.044 times x plus 1.5 times 0.03 times y equals 706.50. Okay, and so now I have two equations, this equation and this equation. Okay, and I have two unknowns. So let's go over here to the other side and we can solve it. Okay, erase all of that. Okay, here we go. So I know x is equal to y plus 2,000. So let's just plug y plus 2,000 in for x. So what is 3 times 0.044? It's 0.132. So 0.132 times x, which is y plus 2,000, plus, okay, what's 1.5 times 0.03? 1.5 times 0.03. 0.045 equals 706.50. Okay, and so now I need to distribute this guy, whoop, whoop, and combine like terms. So 0.132 plus 0.045 is 1.177 plus, when I do 2,000 times 0.132, I get 264 equals 706.50. Then I can subtract 706.50 minus 264, and I get 442.5. And then I can divide by 0.177. And I got 2,500. Okay, and so then that tells me that x is going to be that plus 2,000. So x equals 4,500. So x is the amount invested in the 3-year CD. So he invested 4,500 in the 3-year CD, and he invested 2,500 in the 18-month CD. Okay. Then it says Rachel drove from Miami to Orlando, a total distance of 240 miles. That must be Miami, Florida, not Miami. So she drove for 1 hour in city traffic and 3 hours on the highway. If her average speed on the highway is 20 miles per hour faster than her speed in the city, determine her average speed driving in the city and her average speed driving on the highway. So the two things we don't know is her highway speed and her city speed. So let's write down variable names for both of those things. And we'll write down two equations. So we'll let x equal her highway speed. And what, maybe I'll choose better, more suggestive variable names. So we'll let h be the highway speed. Ooh, that was kind of weird. H is going to be the highway speed, and C will be the city speed. Okay, cool. So I know that the speed on the highway is 20 miles per hour faster than the city speed. So highway speed is going to be city speed plus 20. And then I know that her total distance is 240 miles. So I have these distances, I have amounts of time, and I have these speeds or rates. So we know that distance equals rate times time. Okay, and if you don't remember that, just remember that you usually measure speeds in like distance over time, miles per hour, something like that, and then you can multiply it over and get distance equals rate times time. So that's what we want to use. So her distance, total distance, is 240. That needs to equal her distance driving in the city, which is going to be her city speed times her amount of time that she drove in the city, which is 1. Plus, this is going to be her distance that she drive on the highway, which is going to be the amount of time, 3, times the rate, her city speed, which is, highway speed, which is H. Okay, so now I have 2 equations and 2 unknowns. So here are my 2 equations. Okay, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do substitution, and I'll replace that H with C plus 20. So I get 240 equals C plus 3 times C plus 20. Okay, so then 240 is equal to 4. C plus 3 times 20 is 60. I can subtract that over. Get 180. So C is 45, which means that H is going to be 45 plus 20, which is 65. Okay. The next one says to perform the indicated operations, simplify, and write in standard form. So for this one, I'm just going to add the real parts and add the complex parts. So negative 8 plus 6 is negative 2, and 3i minus 5i is minus 2i. Next, I want to subtract. So let's go ahead and simplify, or distribute that negative sign first. So I'll have 12 minus 5i minus 9 plus 7i. Let's see. So that's going to be 12 minus 9 is 3, and then negative 5i plus 7i is plus 2i. Okay, on this one, I need to distribute everything out. So I'll distribute that 5 across here, and then I'll distribute that minus 3i across here. So I'll get 5 times negative 4 is negative 20. 5 times 5i is plus 25i. Negative 3i times negative 4 is plus 12i. And negative 3i times positive 5i is going to be negative 15i squared. And remember, I squared is negative 1. So I end up with negative 20. Let's see, how many i's do I have? 25 plus 12, so that's 37i. And then I have minus 15 times negative 1, so plus 15. So I end up with negative 5 plus 37i. And then 4 minus 3i divided by 6 plus 5i. When I do this division, what we're going to need to do is I want to make the bottom part into a real number. So what I'm going to do is multiply by the conjugate of the denominator on top and bottom. So I'm going to multiply by 6 minus 5i over 6 minus 5i. And what's that going to give me? On the bottom, I'm going to get 6 squared minus 5i squared. So in the denominator, that gives me 36 And when I do I squared, that gives me a negative 1, so that'll change that to a plus. And 5 squared is 25, so plus 25. So that gives me what on the bottom? 36 plus 25 is 61. Okay, and on the top, I'm just going to multiply these out. So 4 times 6 is 24. 4 times negative 5i is minus 20i. Negative 3i times 6 is negative 18i. And then negative 3i times negative 5i is positive 15i squared. And so what is that? 24 minus 38i plus minus 15. Okay, and 24 minus 15 is 9. 9 minus 38i. Okay, so that's 9 61sts minus 38 61st I. Okay, solve the quadratic equation by factoring. I'll do this over here at the side. Okay, so first I want to move that 24 over. So I'll have x squared plus 5x minus 24 equals 0. And so I can factor that. X. Okay. Factors of 24. My first thought is 8 and 3. And I can get a 5 out of 8 and 3. So let's do the 8 and the 3. Okay. I want to get a positive 5. So I want the 8 to be positive and the 3 to be negative. Okay, and if I have two things multiplied together equal to 0, that means that either x plus 8 is 0 or x minus 3 is 0. That's called the zero product property of the real numbers. So if we have x plus 8 equals 0 and x minus 3 equals 0, that gives me x is equal to negative 8 and x is equal to positive 3 on my two solutions. Now I want to solve a quadratic equation by completing the square. So I'll have x squared minus 14x, and then I'll write a plus 7 here. Okay, and what I want to add here is, I know that 14 divided by 2 is 7, and I want to square that. So I want to add 49 to both sides. And then this part here can be rewritten as x minus 7 quantity squared is equal to 42. 49 minus 7 is 42. And then I can, if I want to keep going, I'm going to square root both sides. So I'll have x minus 7 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 42, and then I can add the 7. And there's my answer. Then I want to solve this one using the quadratic formula. So my A is 3, my B is negative 5, and my C is negative 4. So x equals negative B, so positive 5, plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared, which is 25, minus 4 times 3 times negative 4, all over 2 times 3. So I get x equals 5 plus or minus 25 minus 4 times 3 times negative 4. That's 73 over 6. And that's as simple as we can go. So the next one says a patio is configured from a rectangle with two right triangles. The length of the rectangle is 20 feet. The base of the right triangle is 3 feet less than the height of the triangle. The total area is that. Determine the height of the triangular portions. Okay, one thing you might notice is that this triangle here can fit over here. And so then I have that the patio becomes a rectangle with height x, and the width is 20 plus x minus 3. So I know that the total area is going to be 348, should be equal to the area of this rectangle now. And this rectangle has width x and length is 20 plus x minus 3. And 20 minus 3 is 17. So 348 is equal to x squared plus 17x. And so 0 is equal to x squared plus 17x plus 348. Okay, and after a little bit of fiddling around, we want to find factors. Is 348 divisible by anything? And so I figured out it's divisible by 12. So I can factor this with 12, and it's 12 times 29. And I notice that I can get a 17 out of that. Oh, shoot. When I move that over, it becomes a negative. So this is a minus 348. Okay. So I want the 29 to be positive and the 12 to be negative. So, so if that equals 0, that gives me x equal 12 and x equal negative 29. So negative 29 obviously is an answer we're going to throw out because it doesn't make sense for a positive width of a patio to be negative 29. So we're going to let x equal 12. And that's the height of the triangular portion. So that's it. X equals 12. Next one. In a Seinfeld episode, Jerry tosses bread straight upward to his friend George. If the loaf of bread leaves Jerry's hand at a height of 1 meter with an initial velocity of 18 meters per second, okay, and probably somewhere in your textbook you have an equation that looks like this. S equals negative 4.9 t squared plus v naught t plus s naught, where this is my initial velocity, and this is my initial position. Okay, and so my initial velocity, it tells me, is 18 meters per second, and my initial position is 1 meter. So let's plug that in. So S is equal to negative 4.9 t squared plus, my initial velocity is 18, t plus 1. So there is my equation for part A. And for part B, it says, how long will it take the bread to reach George if he catches the bread on the way up at a height of 16 meters? So we want to let 16 meters be the height. And we want to set this. Okay, and so I can subtract that 16 over. Okay, and then I can plug that into the quadratic formula. Okay, so I get t is equal to negative 18 plus or minus, and this gives me 18.0814822 over negative 9.8. Okay, and so if I do the plus, let's see, negative 18 plus divided by negative 9.8, that gives me a negative value. So I want to do the positive, or the minus one. Negative 18 minus 18.08148. And then I want to divide that by negative 9.8. So that gives me 3.68. seconds. Okay, so that's the answer to B. The next one, I want to solve this rational equation. And so what I want to do is multiply by something that's going to clear out all those denominators. And so what I notice here is that this denominator factors to x minus 5x plus 1. So I'm going to multiply everything by x minus 5 times x plus 1. So we'll multiply the whole thing by x minus 5 x plus 1 because I can see that that's going to factor that way. So when I do that, when I multiply the 3x over x minus 5 by x minus 5, that clears out the denominator. So I'll just be left with 3x times x plus 1. And when I multiply the 2 over x plus 1 by x plus 1, that just gives me the 2. So I'm just left with 2 times x minus 5. And when I multiply the 2x squared plus 40 by the x minus 5 times x plus 1, that clears out the whole denominator on that one, and I'm just left with 2x squared plus 40. Okay, so that gives me, when I distribute this, 3x squared plus 3x plus 2x, equals 2x minus 10 plus 2x squared plus 40. Okay, and then I want to move everything over to one side. So 3x squared minus 2x is just x squared. How many x's do I have? 3x minus 2x is just x. And then negative 10 plus 40 is 30. When I subtract that over, I get minus 30 equals 0. And I can factor this. Let's see, 5 and 6 are factors of 30, and I can get a 1 out of that. So plus 6 minus 5 will give me a positive 1x in the middle. And so x equals negative 6 and positive 5 are my solutions to 13. The next one, I want to solve the radical equations. The first thing I want to do is add 7 to the other side. And so if I do that, I'll get square root of 2x minus 5 is equal to 12 minus 7, which is 5. Then I can square both sides, and I get 2x minus 5 is equal to 25. Then I can add that 5 over. 2x equals 30. So x is equal to 15. And that's the answer to part A. And for part B, I'll move over here. I can say, I can subtract the 2 over. So I have square root of x plus 18 is equal to x minus 2. Then I can square both sides. So I'll have x minus 18 is equal to x plus 2 quantity squared. So that's x plus 2, or x minus 2, excuse me. Times x minus 2. So x minus 18 is equal to x squared minus 2x minus 2x, so minus 4x, plus negative 2 times negative 2 is 4. And then I can subtract the x and add the 18. I get 0 equals x squared minus 5x. And when I add 18, I get plus 22. So let's see, factors of 22 are just 2 and 11. So that's not going to factor. So we'll use the quadratic formula. X equals positive 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 minus 4 times 1 times 22 all over 2 times 1. I can see this is going to give me complex roots because 4 times 22 is 88, which is greater than 25. So I get x is equal to 5 plus or minus square root of negative 63 over 2, which is 5 halves plus or minus square root of 63i. And that's the answer to B. Then make an appropriate substitution to solve that quadratic-like equation. So for the substitution, I can see that we have an x to the 2/3 and a 2x to the 1/3. So my substitution that I want to do is I'll substitute u is equal to x to the 1/3. Okay, and so my equation then becomes u squared minus 2u minus 24 equals 0, and I can solve this. Let's see, I'm thinking 6 and 4. And since I want a -2, I'll make the 6 negative and the 4 positive. So u is equal to 6 and -4. So that means x to the 1/3 equals 6 and x to the 1/3 equals -4. And so I can cube both sides. So 6 cubed is 216. And if I cube both sides here, -4 cubed is -64. Okay, last one on this page. Solve the inequality and write the answer in interval notation. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is distribute this 6. So I have -5 is greater than 6x minus 24 plus 7. So that's -17. I want to add that over. -5 plus 17 is 12. Okay, and then I can divide both sides by 6. So I get that x is less than 2 if I write it the other way around. So there's my graph of my solution set. And interval notation will be -∞ to 2 with the open parentheses there.